After the abolition of the First Spanish Republic in 1873, Spain operated as a constitutional monarchy in a time known as the Restoration. Power in the legislature changed hands regularly from right to left in a process known as turnismo. People were unhappy with the government, especially after poor military decisions and the loss of some of the last vestiges of its imperial power. Frustrated by the government, Miguel Primo de Rivera orchestrated a military coup on September 1923, declaring that the only salvation for Spain was deliverance from professional politicians. Miguel dissolved parliament and ruled the country with martial law. His banning of the Catalan language, failure to introduce social progress, and economic failings made him tremendously unpopular. Once he lost the support of the king and the army, he resigned on January 1930. The king tried to restore the image of the government by backing two weak and short-lived premierships, that of Damaso Berenguer and Juan Bautista Aznar Cabañas. The second of these called for municipal elections, which were run on April 1931. In these, left-wing parties gained large ground, proving to the king the popularity of the ideology. Riots broke out on the street, and the king stepped down, declaring in that same month, "Sunday's elections have shown me that I no longer enjoy the love of my people. I shall deliberately suspend the use of my royal prerogative." Thus, the progressive Second Spanish Republic was formed. It allowed women's suffrage, divorce, freedom of speech, and nationalized land, banks, and railways. It also granted autonomy to the linguistically distinct Catalonia and Basque Country, which bothered many nationalists. An abortive agrarian reform law was passed, redistributing latifundium from their owners to peasants. Coupled with aggression towards the Catholic Church in the form of expropriation of religious land, destruction of monuments, and educational secularization, Catholics, landowners, nobles, and nationalists united against the Republic. In 1936, the Popular Front, a coalition of left-wing parties, won the parliamentary elections by a small margin. The left became energized with peasants seizing land and violence growing throughout the country. When right-wing politician José Calvo Sotelo was murdered on July 13th, the long-brewing plans of a right-wing military coup were set into motion, beginning in Morocco and led by the once-exiled monarchist military man Francisco Franco.
In the 2 months after the uprising was declared, the nationalist forces took Sevilla and controlled much of Andalusia. Up north, they united numerous militia groups under common leadership, gave them weapons, and controlled much territory. The 3-year-long siege of Madrid began. Germany and Italy pledged to support Franco, while France and the UK chose non-intervention. Eager to test new weapons, Italy and Germany joined with tanks like the L5 and the Panzer I, as well as air support. Soviets also sent T-26 tanks, which were not very effective. Support for the Republicans did not match that of the nationalists, despite help from the USSR and international volunteer brigades. Eventually, nationalist air power would almost double that of the Republicans, a defining factor. In April 1937, the nationalists employed a war tactic that was to have huge repercussions on 20th century warfare: terror bombing of population centers. Up to 1,000 civilians died in Guernica, an unimportant civilian center, weakening Republican morale and leadership. In May, the lack of leadership between Republican groups sparked violent riots in Barcelona. Communists fought anarchists. Trotskyists fought Stalinists. Up to 1,000 Republicans died. This lack of leadership stood in stark contrast to the nationalist, rigid hierarchy, another defining factor in the war. In June, the Blitzkrieg was probably used successfully for the first time to take Bilbao, as rapid movement of infantry troops combined with lightning aerial raids were too much for the Republican defense to handle. The mechanization of war that would characterize World War II had already started. In April 1938, the nationalists broke through to the Mediterranean at Vinaroz, splitting Republican Spain in two and preventing the transportation of key resources. This would play a massive role in the final stretch of the war. In March, the nationalists bombed Barcelona, killing over 1,000 people. 0 nationalist airplanes were shot down, exemplifying the disparity in strength and coordination. In January 1939, the nationalists marched into Barcelona. The UK recognized Franco's regime by February. The war officially ended in April 1, 1931. Women were not given any more rights or participation in nationalist areas than traditional roles. In Republican areas, however, they were much more involved in the conflict, some actually fighting, and feminist liberation motivated many. Clergy members, on the other hand, rallied for support of the nationalist movement in retaliation against Republican desecration of religious temples. In November 1936, the Bishop of Tuy famously stated, "It is not a struggle between two civilizations. One civilization struggles, the Spanish and Christian one, against communist barbarity, strengthened with the energies of hell and the armies that the Prince of Darkness wields upon this earth to make war against Jesus Christ.
Let's take a look at Franco's legacy. Franco engaged in horrific, unjustifiable killings while in power, among them Luis Companys, the former head of the Catalonian regional government. Almost 500,000 fled the country after the war, many of them Republicans fleeing Franco's repressive tactics and persecution of political opponents. Franco's government censored the content of many sources of media such as foreign books, which he believed threatened his position as head of state. Foreign films were manipulated or outright banned. Films were also used to boast the success of Franco's leadership and promote the values of his state. Press censorship was also a direct result of this conflict. A law passed in 1938 put the press under the direct control of the military. All newspapers were required to submit a copy to the ministry before publication, filtering news critical of Franco. Franco also removed the laws established by the Republic protecting women's rights, and they were expected to return to their traditional roles. He established an autarkic economic policy which isolated Spain from most of its international trade. And although one might criticize Franco, the Republicans weren't innocent either. Despite the modern progressive ideas embodied by the Republic, their extremism made them unfit to rule Spain. While we might commend their enfranchisement of women and their granting of the right to divorce, they took it a step too far with anti-clerical laws like the prohibition of manifestation of Catholicism, like processions and the forced secularization of schools. The incineration of religious buildings and prosecution of religious leaders are similarly deplorable. Many other of the Republicans' policies were failures like the forced redistribution of land to peasants who were rarely able to maximize its utility. The problem in Spain wasn't the right nor was it the left. Rather was the degrees of extremism they allowed in defense of their positions. One might criticize Franco for being too antiquated or the Republicans for being too secular, but the real issue was their blatant disregard for the country's well-being and the lives of its citizens.